Our first panel this morning is going to be led by a gentleman from Lubbock, Texas, who grew up outside of Brownfield in a community called Meadow. Like all good South Plains kids, the good ones, he had an epiphany and decided to go get his college degree at Texas A&M University before coming back to Brownfield and managing a groundwater district. And then he now is the general manager of the High Plains Groundwater District in Lubbock. And that's my good friend Jason Coleman. Jason, wherever you're at now, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to introduce your first group, Adapting to a Changing Landscape Stakeholders Panel. And again, thank you all for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for the privilege to be engaged in the event and have opportunity to visit this morning with some esteemed colleagues that are all certainly interested in water. And I have known some of them for a rather short time and some for quite a while, but nevertheless a privilege to visit with all of them this morning. I will reference, as Carlos did yesterday, the reminder that the bios for our participants are included in the printed materials, and to make best use of the things that you really want to hear, which is their perspective on these issues. I'm going to quickly introduce Ben Weinheimer on the end with Texas Cattle Feeders Association, Maurice Hall with Environmental Defense Fund, Karen Work with ConocoPhillips, and Alison Strube with the City of San Angelo. So we're looking forward to their involvement not only in this panel, but they'll be, I think, here for other portions of the conference. And I know in visiting with them, they're excited about water conservation and water issues, and be glad to visit with you if you have any other questions. So we did a little bit of a rehearsal via conference call a week or two ago, and hopefully you'll get as much benefit from this panel as I did even in that brief discussion. But we do have a microphone that we can hand down as the participants have opportunity to address different issues. And so we're going to start, and I guess, Ben, since since the microphone is with you, this is an opportunity to provide a quick overview of the organizations that you each represent and work with, and some of the water supply needs that go along with it, and maybe some ability to discuss the investment in water conservation.
All right. Good morning, Jason, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of the panel discussion this morning. Our organization primarily represents cattle feeders in Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. Our members feed approximately 28% of the country's beef, so considerable amount of production, and some of the things that I'll highlight for you here shortly also extend across not just beef production, but all crops and livestock production within Texas. So briefly, just to cover a few things, we're all aware of this graphic related to global population and what our challenges are as far as, in particular for our sector, in the ag sector, the food and fiber that it'll take to feed a population somewhere around 9.7 or 10 billion people in the next 30 years. And with that, we also know that here in the U.S. we expect another 100 million people roughly, another 20 million to continue to come into Texas. So it's upon all of us to make sure that we're doing our part, especially when it comes to water, to ensure that we have adequate quantities, infrastructure, quality, all the things that us and the various water groups need to provide for a growing population. Now, in particular for us, obviously, I hope you all have had a chance here to enjoy some of this while you've been in San Antonio, but definitely, whether it's beef production or the other proteins, as well as our crops that we grow throughout the state, play a huge role in, of course, meeting the nutrient needs of this population. And Texas has definitely done our part. We have for a number of years and continue to top the list when it comes to production in cattle, sheep, and goats. You can see there the other rankings in the top, all the way down to the top 15, including pork production in this country. So that food production definitely is a big part of Texas heritage, as was commented earlier. And as part of that, water plays obviously a key role in that, and I'll talk about that here specifically in just a minute. The crop side of what we do, whether that's the variety of food and fiber crops, again, Texas topping the list in cotton, hay, peanuts, near the top in sorghum, big wheat producer, and corn as well, when you look at it regionally. So you might also note, as you compare those kind of top right to bottom left, we're number 1 in cattle, but we're number 12 in corn. And we utilize a significant amount of corn to feed the cattle population that we have, which means that about 2/3 of the corn that we utilize in this state is actually coming to us on rail from the Midwest. So if you will, if you've ever looked at some of those studies, we actually import a significant amount of water from the Midwest when it comes to just the corn production that we need to feed livestock in this state. So those crop and livestock numbers are obviously important. When you look at just the gross receipts, as far as the economic contribution of agriculture in the state, cattle, not surprisingly, plays a big part of that, roughly half. And as well, when you break that down, so cash receipts alone are about 14 or so billion with livestock and poultry. Grain, hay, and fiber, another 6.3 billion in cash receipts. And then total, as you look at food and fiber, overall economic impact as those dollars move through the economy represent about 120 billion. So it depends on which year you pick and how you look at that, but definitely Texas agriculture plays a huge part in terms of the economics when it comes to our overall, not just our regional economies, but our state economies. Now, that said, irrigation, of course, being a big part of that. And as we look at overall water demands for the state of Texas, looking here at 2020 out to 2050, and I know our crystal balls in our regional water planning groups have us going out to 2070, but they get a little fuzzier out there. They get a little fuzzy, obviously, at 2050. But our goals are, of course, to do the best job that we can using the best facts and science that we have available to us. So roughly 20 million acre feet expected in Texas as far as demands 30 years down the road. The percentage there you can see, and the reason I put those up there is just so that you could get a feel for maybe keep in your mind that crops and livestock utilize about roughly half of the water demands in the state. So those are important, and it also demonstrates the serious linkage that we have based in terms of both feeding and clothing people, as well as keeping these rural economies and even our hub cities and larger municipalities operating in terms of the ag economy that we have and how we contribute to that. The other graphic here is just then to say, all right, so when you put that in perspective relative to surface and groundwater, these total supplies for crop and livestock roughly come from 25% surface water, 50% of it dependent on the Ogallala. So we're, of course, a lot of our significant amount of our production is, and then other aquifers about another 25%. So we clearly rely on 75% groundwater to drive that crop and livestock production. Given that you do have to be a little bit cautious that not all of those water user groups within crop and livestock actually use much water. So that would, as example, all the cattle that we have out on range and pasture that serve a purpose of harvesting grass and converting that to protein and doing it actually with very little surface or groundwater use when it comes to that part of our production chain. The other part of that too is that you see when you look at the Ogallala, and it's difficult to say that it's 50% or more for all of those crops and livestock entities that are listed, but a significant portion, in many cases it is that more than 50% of that production comes out of the Texas High Plains and South Plains. So keep that in mind in terms of perspective and why we have such a focus on ensuring the importance of long-term groundwater supplies for Texas food and fiber.
Good morning. Maurice Hall. Real treat to be here. I appreciate you including us in the discussion. I'm with Environmental Defense Fund, and we're a global environmental organization that works to improve conditions in the world for fish and wildlife and for people. And some trademarks of our work are, one, accessing the best science, bringing the best science to problem solving, whether that be in water, whether that be in energy, bring the best information to address the issues. Another trademark of our work is looking at economic situation and trying to align the economic drivers with the outcomes that lead to sustainable communities and sustainable ecosystems. Another trademark of our work is working with partners, and that's a lot about what my discussion is today, recognizing that in groundwater in Texas, groundwater conservation districts, the kind of partners that you want to work with. We work with partners to test new ideas, refine those ideas, and then together take those ideas and try to insert them into guidance, incentive programs, and where necessary, policies. Now, I lead our work in water. In water, we work across the West to try and make sure that the water supplies of all the stakeholders and all the community are recognized. And we tend to focus on those parts of the water community that are usually not as present and not as engaged in the dialogue, and that is the environment, the ecosystems, and those rural and often disadvantaged communities that tend to be under-resourced or not as resourced as well as our big cities and in some cases the corporate entities. And so we want to see the water supply needs of habitats show up where they're needed. We want to make sure these disadvantaged communities and these rural communities are represented in the water dialogue. So we're working to better understand their needs, to make their needs more clear and understood by the other people who are managing water. But in water, we also recognize that the needs of these habitats and the needs of these rural communities and disadvantaged communities, if their needs are going to be met in a durable way, it's going to be because the needs of our farms and our cities and our economy are also being met reliably. And so a really big part of our perspective on this is how do we work with all those interests to build a water supply system that provides the needs in a proactive and a deliberate way that we need for the future so that our communities as a whole can survive in the long term and thrive in the long term. Now, I often get, we work a lot in groundwater, and I often get the question of, so if you're worried about habitats and communities, why are you worried about groundwater? That's below the ground. Well, obviously in Texas, springs are a big thing. It's kind of iconic in Texas, the big springs where groundwater very clearly emerges from the ground and provides flows in the rivers and streams. But beyond these springs, there's also a lot of habitats that depend on groundwater. Riparian forest, for instance, is a classic example of that. But in addition, as has been pointed out and as we're coming to understand more broadly, the flows in our streams and rivers depend on groundwater. So this issue of how groundwater management affects the flows in the streams and rivers is a big part of our work. It's important for fish and wildlife. It's also important for all those interests that depend on stream flows and river flows, those water right holders that depend on river flows. And so we feel like the whole idea of managing our water system in an integrated way, groundwater and surface water, is a really important part of the future of water management. And with increasing demands, as we've seen the increasing demands of the population, it's going to become more and more important in the future to recognize that integration and not only to pay attention to it, but to proactively use the benefits and the functions that groundwater provides and surface water provides in a proactive way to make our whole water system more resilient.
Hi, Karen. We're at ConocoPhillips. I was born and raised north of Amarillo and got my degree from Texas Tech. Go Raiders. I do love Aggies, though, because my son's an Aggie. And he married an Aggie, so hopefully we'll have little Aggie babies one day. But anyway, I love Texas. It's a wonderful place. I currently live in Carlsbad, New Mexico. So our water needs, as y'all know, we cannot do what we do, oil and gas companies, without water, right? We can't drill a well. We cannot complete a well without having water. And our water needs have changed greatly over the last probably 2 to 5 years. We used to stimulate with less water. We used a guar-based system. It was a gel system. It was very sensitive to solids and some other things. And so we found out that we can use a slick water design that is not as sensitive to solids, and it sets us up to be able to recycle. And in our area that I operate in the Delaware Basin. Of course, the Permian is, I'm the water management supervisor for Permian. So in lower 48, we have 3 main plays. We have the Bakken in North Dakota. I worked that asset for 5 years. We have the Permian, and then we also have the Eagle Ford, which y'all know is very close to here. And so those are our 3 main focuses as far as lower 48 is concerned. We drill anywhere from, in the Permian, the downturn hit Permian pretty hard. We didn't really do anything much for a couple of years. And then I took this position about a year and a half ago. And so since then, in 2015, they actually did a study where we took slick water, we took produced water, and we cleaned it up and we reused it for stimulation fluid. And it was very successful. And the downturn, this project that I'm doing right now probably would have been done a couple of years ago if the downturn had not hit in 2015, 16. As y'all know, we had kind of the carpet pulled out from under us, right, with the low prices. And so it got put off. I was fortunate that I got to come in and do this. My background is actually production engineering and completion engineering. And so the water role was new for me. Water was just there, and I used it to stimulate a well. Well, now I get to figure out how to get it there and how to manage water in a drought area. As y'all know, the Delaware Basin, Permian area, even into the Zia Hills is it's a drought community. We don't get much rain like our Eagle Ford and Houston area. I was in Houston when Harvey went through, and you just can't imagine that much water ever. And then where I live in Carlsbad, we don't get a lot of rainwater. So it's a perfect situation where our wells, when we produce them, they make about 4 barrels of water to every barrel of oil that we produce. So we get quite a bit of water back, and then there's not much water to use. And so it's a perfect climate and situation to be able to recycle. And so when I started in that role a year and a half ago, we built 2 pits that are specifically designed to hold treated produced water. We work with a vendor that recycles the water. We had our construction group put in pipeline. We talk about infrastructure. We had to build infrastructure, be able to recycle. And we started recycling January of this year. I'm real happy to say it was one of our goals for this year. And currently, I can't remember the percentage. The last well we did about 90% of our water was reused. We used very little fresh water. We have to use a little bit of fresh water when we initially pressure test, and then also at the very end of completing a well, we want to clean the lines, clean the well heads, so we're not leaving anything on the ground. But our focus is to use as much recycled water as we can. And so just to give you an idea how much water we do need, because the slick water design, they found that more water, higher rate gets us better production. And so we used to use maybe 50,000 barrels of water to stimulate a well, and now we're using anywhere from 250 to 450,000 barrels of water per well. And so we're going to stimulate probably around 45 wells this year. Next year, we hope to increase that. And so y'all can, if y'all add that up, it's a lot of water, right? We need a lot of water. And how do we not use fresh water? That's our goal. And so currently in the Delaware Basin, we are recycling. I'm currently working on a plan in New Mexico to recycle. I said I have to get really good in Texas before we go to New Mexico because it's going to be a little bit tougher there with the regulations. And so everything that we're doing now and learning will implement and start probably second quarter next year in New Mexico recycling, because we do get quite a bit of water back from those wells that we can reuse. And so, you know, what is our goal? Our goal, we know water's a precious commodity. If we want to increase production, we are going to have increased water. And really just recycling is a small part. So yeah, we're challenged on what water we use, but we're also challenged with what are we going to do with all this water we produce? We can't just keep re-injecting it, whether it's through a disposal well or whether it's in a stimulation, you know, for actual using to stimulate the well. And so we have been challenged by upper management. You know, what can we do? How can we find a way? How can we get incentives and get the government involved to give us incentives to clean this water up so we can provide it, you know, for cattle or for crops? We'd find a way to provide surface discharge versus injection. And so we're looking at different ways. There's evaporation, there's distillation, there's RO, which is very expensive to make it almost potable water that we can use somewhere else other than injecting it back in the ground. And so we do have quite a few challenges. We feel like the recycle is just a small part. We have to continue as we grow our oil and gas production to say, what are we going to do with the water afterwards? And so it is a very important, this has been my first groundwater conference I've ever been at, and it has been extremely enlightening to see some of the challenges both on the political side and the resource side. And so I very much appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this panel and just let you know a little bit about what ConocoPhillips is doing. And it's not just me. We have several other companies. We had a Produced Water Society meeting in Midland a couple weeks ago, and many of my partners, Cimarex, Diamondback, XTO, Pioneer, there's many of us that are going to recycle because we know that we need to conserve the precious resource that we have. So it is a very important topic to us. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm from the city of San Angelo. I'm the Water Utilities Director. And if any of you know San Angelo, it probably has some of the most complicated water rights in the state of Texas. We are surrounded by 3 lakes in San Angelo, but most of them in the drought of 2011 were completely dry. One of our main water sources is a surface water source about 50 miles east of San Angelo, and that's Lake Ivy. In the drought of 2011, San Angelo hit 12 months of water supply. They had purchased groundwater rights back in the early 70s, and a lot of history happened between the 70s and 2011, but ultimately the city of San Angelo invested close to $120 million in developing a well field just south of Melvin, Texas, in the Hickory Aquifer. To bring that source online, the project was being expedited because of we are serving 100,000 people with water, Air Force Base. Water supply, obviously, was of the utmost importance for San Angelo during that time. And so we brought on a system in 2013. Luckily, we had some rains that replenished some of our surface water sources, but the groundwater supply for San Angelo became a lifeline. While they had purchased those rights in the early 70s, they didn't have a need to use them. But it became, like I said, a lifeline for San Angelo, and we've gone through a lot of history to get us to where we are today, but the groundwater system is ultimately providing about 10% of our water supply today, and it could provide more. Obviously, with the rainfall that we've had last year, we're in a different case or a different water supply scenario than we were a couple years ago. When you come to San Angelo, if you're new to the area, and they say we have 24 months of water supply, most people would be shocked. If you're from San Angelo and you've been in San Angelo your whole life, that's great. We have 2 years of water supply. No one blinks an eye at that. And so we've juggled, since I've been with the utility in the past 5 years, we've been anywhere from 24 to 36 months of water supply. And that's kind of, we can sit back and relax at those numbers. And that's scary for me as the utility director serving a population of 100,000. So developing our groundwater source has been crucial, and we continue to work with that system. And so hopefully throughout the rest of the questions I can kind of address why it's so important to the city of San Angelo.
Very good. Thank you all. I suppose that one of the things that a lot of folks are interested in knowing is if you have had an interaction with a groundwater conservation district in the state of Texas relating to your unique situation as it concerns groundwater permitting, groundwater investigations, whatever it may be. And so I will just started here with Alison, and yeah, this is a good place to start this part of the questions, I think. But describe what, if any, interactions your water user group has had with groundwater conservation districts.
While I've been with the city for the past 7 years, the history between the city of San Angelo and our groundwater district that our well field is located in goes back many decades. I can't say that it's always been the greatest relationship. The city of San Angelo purchased these rights under the G. Raleigh Wright Trust Ford Ranch back in the early 70s. The groundwater district wasn't formed at that time, obviously. It wasn't formed till almost a decade later. Going through the permitting process, lawsuits were filed both ways. Even another municipality was involved in lawsuits because of their investment in that aquifer. I would like to think that we've come a long way since that time. Working together, we obviously did get permits issued to the city of San Angelo, but it wasn't until 1997 that settlement agreement or the permit was issued to San Angelo. So we're talking a couple decades worth of lawsuits and back and forth with the city, City of Brady, and the Hickory Underground Water Conservation District. And so we continue to work with the district. We have developed that well field like I talked about in the early 2011, 2014 timeframe, and working to develop the well field to our permitted capacity and those type of things. So it was a rough history from everything that I've read and been told about, but I think that we're making steps forward to kind of making that a better relationship.
It's a little comforting to say, yeah, that all happened before I started here, right? Okay.
My answer may be similar since I've only been in my role a year and a half. I was actually glad Jason sent these questions before because this question kind of stumped me. I'm like, what do we do with groundwater districts? So I started asking other people, right, that have been here. I talked to our supply chain group and our surface land folks, and we honestly have not had very much interaction with our groundwater district, and so we mainly deal with landowners. A lot of where we get our water. So around Permian, we get a lot of our water from water wells, so that come from landowners, and then in the Delaware Basin, the same. There's some ranches that and water wells that are owned that we get water from for fresh water if we're not recycling. In the Zia Hills area, again, there's landowners in Texas that are drilling wells, and we've typically gotten water. We also operate wells up around Maljamar, so east of Artesia. It's a very water poor area. We did 3 wells recently, and what it told me is I've got to do a better job planning water because it is challenging when there's a pretty dry area. How are we going to stimulate these wells? And fortunately, Fortunately, they require less water than some of our other wells. They're about 200,000 barrels per well. But definitely there may be more involvement with us drilling our own wells in the future. I know we drilled some in the past, and I wasn't here at the time that they did that. But I do believe probably the landowners have more to do with the groundwater districts for them to get their water well permits managed and done so that we can get the water from them. And so I think it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to say maybe we need to have more involvement with our groundwater district to see, what we can do as a joint effort towards solving some of these issues, or, how can we help each other, right? And so that's really...
So you have a glowing review of districts at this point in time?
Do I?
You have a glowing review of groundwater conservation districts?
Yes, very
okay,
glowing.
Thank you,
I
Karen.
have no
That's a
issues
good
with
place to
groundwater
move
district.
on. Okay.
I love our landowners, though, that help us get water. So,
Okay.
Anyway.
Thank you.
So our work in Texas is really just being re-energized. And so we haven't worked a good bit with GCDs up to this point. But if we want to see the thriving water future in Texas that we want to see, we really think groundwater conservation districts are key. We, especially in groundwater management, given groundwater's unique local characteristics, we find that local management of groundwater is really the best approach, and therefore groundwater conservation districts are going to be really key. These local managers can do a good job. Our observation in other places is that local managers do a good job if they have the good information, they have the right tools, they have the right authorities, and they have the resources they need to get the job done. And so we envision our work being working with groundwater conservation districts, helping to provide information, develop new tools, and to make sure they have the resources to do their job. These are the folks that get up every day thinking about groundwater management, and they're the ones who are going to solve the problems, see the issues first, and they're also the ones who are going to be looking out for their local community and the different users of groundwater. As an example of the kinds of things that we do, in the southern San Joaquin Valley in California, groundwater districts newly formed under the 2014 Groundwater Act are struggling to figure out how to bring their groundwater basins into balance. We're working with a group called the Rosedale Rio Bravo Water Storage District, which, if you look at a map of the overdraft areas in California, they're right in the middle of one of the big giant red spots. But with good local management, they're working to put together a plan to augment their groundwater supply with surface water sources, and we're working with them to actually design a groundwater trading program that allows users who need additional water, more than their allocation, to pay other users to forego their water use, either temporarily or on a long-term basis. And our intent is to test and refine this program very quickly so that it can serve as an example for other groundwater districts who are struggling with the same issue. And also, we expect we're going to have to go alongside with folks from Rosedale Rio Bravo and work with the state to adjust some of the guidance and some of the oversight rules to better allow this water trading system to work. So that's an example of the kinds of things that we want to do, and look forward to exploring opportunities with the groundwater districts here in Texas.
Jason, so in terms of just engagement with groundwater conservation districts, pretty safe to say that the constituency that I represent up here, agriculture in general, and the private property owners within the state of Texas, given in part that we were probably a large piece of the motivation for why the entity that you work for was created in 1951 as the first groundwater district in the state of Texas. I believe we collectively, in terms of crop and livestock producers, have had a long history of engagement with GCDs, And so that's taken many shapes and forms over the years, even in the years that I've had an opportunity to be engaged in this. That definitely starts even at the legislative level within Austin and collaborating on water policy issues and understanding our needs as well as what some of the goals of the groundwater conservation districts are. And that's not by accident, because the vast majority of our crop and livestock organizations have strong policies around groundwater as a private property right that's managed by locally elected and locally managed groundwater conservation districts. So it is very much a hand-in-hand approach when it comes to groundwater management and conservation. The other pieces, of course, are just all the value then that we in return get out of the groundwater conservation districts, whether that's through making sure that we're complying with well spacing requirements for their good, for the good of the aquifer, and for our own good, that we're utilizing all the data that's collected, whether that be through helping us understand what wells are doing in terms of production and evaluating those periodically, understanding saturated thickness, and all the monitoring wells that the groundwater districts have in place to help us monitor and understand what our long-term water supply availabilities will be. Of course, that becomes important whether or not you're an irrigator or you own a livestock operation. There's a lot of capital investments in that infrastructure. And so being able to kind of match that up with what your groundwater resources are, as well as your short-term and long-term business plans, all fit well in terms of the collaboration and the value that we get out of the GCDs.
So you also have a glowing review of groundwater conservation districts. Okay, that's another good place to stop. Let's just call it good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good to have a little humor up here as well, Jason. But definitely, not all in agreement on every issue on every occasion. But the good part about it is that generally, as mentioned earlier, we're working with people that we know at the local level, at the county level. So these are, very much peer-to-peer conversations that can where people can sit down face-to-face in whether that's in White Deer, in Lubbock, wherever the office is. That's generally not too much distance to drive, especially when you look at how much we travel across Texas.
Outstanding. Are we nearly at the question period? So one thing that we're going to have in this section is an opportunity to come to the microphone and ask a question. The submission of questions through the app and all is also an option. One thing I want to ask right quick, though, and I'm going to also request that each one of you take as close to just 1 minute as you can to answer this question, because our concept, at least in theory here, is building relationships and collaboration, that sort of thing. And so my question is, what do you want to make sure people know about cattle feeding or fracking an oil well or whatever it may be? Because there's misinformation, whatever it may be. You know better than I do about your industry or water user group. So if you can put it in 1 minute, what do you want people to know about your water user?
So I think relative to that, I put some of the data up on the screen. So I think when you come specifically to even looking at livestock production in total, 2% of the water demands in the state of Texas. That's pretty much true. So it ebbs and flows slightly from region to region, but fairly consistent. So not a lot to offer to that. But what I would suggest, and Karen and Maurice both already touched on this, and that is looking forward to the collaboration opportunities that we have. And there's still, from our perspective, a lot of potential collaborations yet to be explored. And one of them is in the high plains where we're sitting on the Dockham Aquifer. And we have within crop and livestock, we have varying needs of water quality expectations. And cattle, as an example, can consume a lot different type of water quality than humans. And so we have as can the various user groups up here, whether it's environmental, the municipal expectations, or oil and gas. So those down the road future opportunities for public, private. I mean, it could be a big group of water user groups that come together to collaborate on how can we share in producing water, doing it in a responsible way, and making sure that it's meeting its intended use.
Very, very good. You only need 2% of the water, and it doesn't need to be perfect. So what a success story, right? Okay, go ahead.
So as I mentioned, we are just re-immersing ourselves in Texas groundwater. And I'd just like to say to those groundwater conservation districts who want to see a thriving future for your community, reach out to us. We're going to be hiring some new staff in the next few months. And so over the next few months, we want to hear from you. We want to better understand the future that you want to see for your community and your region. We want to understand your challenges, and we want to figure out how to work with you to make Texas water future that we can all be proud of.
Very good.
Yeah, Ben summed it up a lot the way I feel. That, I mean, one thing I want you to know is that we do take water seriously. The one thing I'm proud about being a member of ConocoPhillips, working for them, and I have for several years, is that, safety and environmental responsibility are huge. For me, for what I do, doing it the best way possible, conserving the water that I can, it's a big drive for me. I'm kind of like the speaker yesterday that mentioned, she wants to have water for her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I'm the same way. And I do think definitely it's going to have to be a collaborative effort. I'm hoping we can help solve some of the water on the livestock and the agriculture side if we can find a good way to clean that water up and get it, available for other purposes, because we do make a lot of water as part of our production. And so it is a serious matter to us, and we're doing all we can to help in that arena.
From the city's perspective, one of the takeaways that I'd like to, leave you with is kind of the topic of this session is adapting to change. I think that throughout the course of San Angelo's history in relation to our groundwater, we've had to adapt. And hopefully we, like they've all mentioned, is the collaboration part, and we've adapted to the city being better of being engaged in GMA, regional planning, and even with our groundwater conservation district. As elementary as it may seem, I don't think many of San Angelo representatives made it to board meetings and engaged themselves in what the district was doing and those type of things, just to be aware and engaging there. And so hopefully kind of one of my philosophies is to be engaged, to understand and to build a relationship with our groundwater district, and kind of basically turn from our maybe not so pleasant past.
All right. Thank you all. Do you have some submissions maybe?
I do
you
have
do.
some submissions.
But yeah, first come, first served, and in person. Okay.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name's Trager. I'm with Presidio County Underground Water Conservation District. I live in Marfa. We're real near Carlsbad. My question's for you, Karen. I'm just kind of trying to understand a little bit about water. And if you say you're using 200,000 barrels to complete a well, and then you get 4 barrels of water for every barrel of oil, I mean, does that mean you're getting 800 barrels of water out of the ground whenever you're stimulating with that much? And then also, when you're recycling, how many times are you able to reuse it?
Okay, where's the microphone? Thank you. So if our wells come on and they're producing, say, 4,000 barrels of oil, yes, that would be 16,000 barrels of water. But right now, what we're getting when we turn on a new well, we don't get a lot of our stimulation fluid back, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. It's mostly water from way down. We're 2 miles down, that comes up. Okay. And right now, when we bring on a brand new well, it's making about 4,000 to 5,000 barrels of water each well, and we do them 4 in a row, so quad pads.
Okay.
So 20,000 barrels, it's a lot. Yeah.
Plus the water that you're sending down in there.
No, that's included in that.
That's
Yes.
included in that. Okay.
Yes,
And then
sir.
how
Yeah,
many
we don't-
times are you able to reuse it?
Huh?
How many times are you able to reuse the
Well,
water?
right now we're taking everything we can get to our recycle. We're permitted right now on 50,000 barrels a day. And when we stimulate a well, we're averaging 6 to 7 stages, which is about 66 to 77,000 barrels of water. So, we're only able to treat 50. So that's why I have big storage ponds. I built these big storage ponds that hold about 1.5 million barrels. I mean, if you could get a boat on it, we could go skiing. It's pretty large, and it's a pretty big maintenance job, bigger than I thought it would be. And so, managing that, making sure we're getting all the water we can. And it's a big planning and scheduling thing as well, because if I'm fracking a couple of quad pads in a row, I'll use up all that water.
Right.
Well, then I got to go to Zia Hills or Permian or Maljamar or somewhere else so I have some recharge time. We'll keep treating and filling those pits. And to make sure we have the water for the next. So I have to work. I've said I've never been in a job in ConocoPhillips that I have to work with so many different groups in our company. I work with just about everybody, from production of getting the water and the environmental, HSC, regulatory. I mean, I work with a huge amount of people in our group to do what we do. So,
Okay, thanks.
does that answer it?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a great video ConocoPhillips created.
YouTube.
Yeah, created
go
on
search
this.
for it,
Yeah,
yeah.
this very project. So see Karen or Google it, but it's really worthwhile.
Great. And we did get a couple questions. I don't know if we'll have time for more than one, but we'll definitely hit one and then see where we are. So what is your perspective, and I think this is for all the panelists, what is your perspective on whether Texas should protect rural areas to ensure water supplies will be available for future irrigation and rural community use? Can you repeat that question?
Is that a particular emphasis on rural or rural at the expense of, or how do you
I think
read?
it is intended to be rural at the expense of moving water out of rural communities and
Okay.
into higher growth areas.
So we have a
So-
rural area that has a water supply that is sold and goes off wherever off is, and
Right.
at what expense to the community. So
And is that something Texas should be protecting, some availability for that resource to remain in those rural communities?
all right.
So I can certainly respond to that. I think with respect to water use across the West, the rural communities that depend on water are going to live and die with their water. And so thinking about the future that you want to maintain for those rural communities and planning the water supply to meet those needs and to make sure those agricultural economies that depend on irrigation and those small towns that need long-term water supplies and supplies for their growth. It might not be as expansive as the growth of Houston or the growth of Austin, but they're going to want to supply their economies in the future too. And so it's really important to include that in the portfolio of water management and plan for that.
Alison, you want to take a stab at it?
As far as the export of water, obviously our permit is an export permit from the Groundwater Conservation District to San Angelo is about 62 miles. But at the same time, we want to protect the aquifer. We want to protect the rural communities that are using that aquifer so that it's available for everyone's use. And so while I do hope that the export is still one of those that doesn't get frowned upon too much because we don't have any local sources that can provide what our aquifer provides today. And so we do have to basically seek further out than just the San Angelo area.
Very good.
Jason, in regards to that question, I just want to highlight in terms of, I think many of the pieces of that puzzle exist and how we have water policy and the way we implement that across the state of Texas. So as we talked about earlier, water being a private property right, managed in accordance with locally elected and managed groundwater conservation districts, the regional water planning efforts that have a responsibility of evaluating all the long-term needs of every water user group. And then with the overarching considerations for desired future conditions of all these aquifers. I think when you fit all those pieces of the puzzle together, and then let the marketplace handle the actual transaction, if you will, of a water trade. But I think that helps kind of make sure that we've not left anybody sitting out on their own through those various pieces that come together to implement water policy in Texas.
Got time for one more? We're done.
We're done. I think so,
Anything
yeah.
else?
I think we should thank our panel.
Yes.
This was an excellent conversation.
Thank y'all very much.